There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Good morning and welcome, New Haven and Connecticut and the world. This is your host, Readman, Jesse Turner, and you're listening to the Truth to Power Hour on 103.5 WNHH, New Haven, Connecticut, the place where we bring you free radio, commercial free, and you get to meet interesting and exciting voices and all kinds of interesting people that we bring on the show. But anyway, today I have a guest who I've interviewed once before, just thinking about his art, because I'm sure we'll talk about it a little later on. But he practices an art. I had watched his work, and I'm like, well, what kind of art is this? It doesn't look like Picasso and stuff. And I think it's social practice art, and later on we'll talk about that when we get into it. But anyway, Ted, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about your passion?
Absolutely. My name is Ted Efremoff. I'm an artist. I'm a professor at Central Connecticut State University, where Jesse and I are colleagues. I would call myself an interdisciplinary artist, which means that I work in many different media. I work in performance art, social practice art, sculpture, video, and film. Among other things. And so the thing Jesse is primarily interested in is social practice art, because I believe he's a social animal and he likes movements of people. So this idea of social practice art probably started before Joseph Beuys, but there's a famous German artist by the name of Joseph Beuys who had a concept called social sculpture. And out of that concept came the concept of social art. And social practice art has been developed after the, let's say, 1960s, 1970s, when Joseph Beuys was involved with social sculpture. And one of his quotes is, "Every human being is an artist, a freedom being," and I'm extrapolating, I don't know the exact quote. But the idea is that every human is creative, and just like you mold clay, you can mold society. So social practice art is the art of social interaction and working with communities of people. So I do that in my own practice, and I also teach a class here at Central called Art and Community.
All great stuff. And people, you need to go to Ted's site, because we are going to talk about his latest film, which premieres today, A Refugee's Guide to Rome. But he has many of these films up on his page, and they're amazing and they're transformative. So one of the recent ones that I watched was, I think it's called The Healing Blues.
Yeah.
And it's people don't know the journeys that it takes to do something like this. So Ted has to write a grant, he has to find collaborators, and I don't know if it was Missouri or Mississippi you went to, but in The Healing Blues, it was beautiful because it was music, it was writers and musicians working with homeless people to create narratives of who they are, and it was amazing. You know, I ordered the music, Ted. So it's on my playlist in the car, and I enjoyed it. Now that I have the background for that, but this idea that art can transform society is amazing. And I think it's always done that. So when civilization collapses, so the pharaohs are gone, but you know what? We see the pyramids, and we see all the hieroglyphics. We see what a society produce in art, and we see that all the time. So if we go to Rome, we're going to want to see the Colosseum, but not only the Colosseum, the mosaics, all the art all around there. and stuff. And I have a feeling that one day, 1,000 years from now, when the aliens land in on our world, they'll find your films and they'll get an idea of who we are. And film can be something to change the world. And so I like that. And I remember when I was looking at it and you were telling me about this social practice art, I said, I have the wrong art professor, you know? And then to use filmmaking, I think I might have changed my major if you were around back then. But it's tell us about your latest work, because your latest work is a refugee's guide to Rome, and it premieres today. And people, you can see this on Amazon and multiple platforms. But can you tell us about this one? Because this one is special.
Yes, absolutely, Jesse. So I grew up in the Soviet Union, and I left the Soviet Union at 16 years of age. My grandmother was actually an American who went to the Soviet Union in the 1930s. She was a teacher. At the time, Ford had factories in the Soviet Union, and she became a teacher of American kids of Ford factory workers in the Soviet Union, and that was her beginnings there. Later, she had to give up her American citizenship under duress because, under order of Stalin, all foreigners either had to leave the country or give up their citizenship of their native countries. At the time, my grandmother already had a family, and her family wasn't going to be allowed to leave with her. So she decided to stay in the Soviet Union. And in 1979, she was able to get her American citizenship reinstated by the American embassy in Moscow. And herself, myself, and my mother, we traveled to the US. And on the way to the US, we were in Rome for about a month or a month and a half. And as a 16-year-old Soviet kid that's never been outside of that country because it was basically illegal for Soviet citizens to travel, I was just really blown away by Rome. I thought it was one of the most sort of foreign to me and amazing cities. I didn't really have a map. I didn't understand where all the locations were, but I knew that as I walked out of my pensione every morning, I could go in any direction and see amazing Renaissance architecture, Roman ruins, Renaissance sculpture, fountains, and all of the beauty of Rome, which really blew me away. So that since 1980, I've been kind of thinking about Rome. I've been back a few times. And in 2017, I decided that because Rome was sort of continually on my mind, I needed to make a work of art dealing with that city. So I wrote some grants. I traveled to Rome. And I reached out to some refugee agencies, and one of them, the Joel Nafuma Refugee Center in Rome, the director, when I reached out, I asked the people I contacted whether they knew of some interesting personalities that have traveled to Rome from abroad. And the director got right back to me and said, I know this man, Joseph Peters. He was a journalist in Sierra Leone. He lived through the Civil War in Sierra Leone, and he supported the LGBT movement in Sierra Leone, and he had to leave because his life was in danger as a result of his activism. So, and she said, I really trust and respect this man, and you should absolutely meet him. So within a day or two, I was sitting with Joseph in a cafe, and he began to tell me his story. And so this film is really the story of Joseph Peters, a refugee from Sierra Leone, who took a long time coming up north through various African countries and the Sahara Desert, spent time in Libya, and then wound up braving the Mediterranean Sea in an inflatable craft to wind up in Lampedusa and then in Rome. And that story is being told in parallel with the story of Aeneas, who is the mythological founder of Rome in Virgil's Aeneid. And Joseph tells Aeneas' story as well.
And Aeneas is a refugee himself. So the connection is that Joseph Peters is a refugee to Rome, and so is Aeneas, who leaves Troy and to come. And the journeys are similar. So I was reading a little bit about Aeneas, and he makes the journey from through Africa, through Carthage, up into crosses the Mediterranean and goes to Italy and then makes it to Rome. It's a similar journey in that stuff. So, and I think the idea of the film is that this is a refugee's guide to Rome, but you're also saying uh, that Rome's mythological hero is a refugee. And when everybody who has been to Europe, it's no different than in America. But in Europe, refugees are often scorned upon, especially any refugees that come from Africa. We've seen the images. Americans have seen the images on the news of overloaded, blow up rafts crossing the ocean, and just the just a dangerous, hazardous journey. And plus the countries, like you said, he went through Libya. He went to the Sahara Desert. He had to cross. I mean, this journey is amazing. And when we were talking yesterday about it, I had said it's similar to the journeys of slaves who fled north before the Civil War in America. They went thousands of miles and they risked their lives every day. And we had an underground railroad that could maybe help them. But that idea that north is freedom and stuff, north is safety. Because I'm sure that when we explain, Joseph's life was in danger. He's a journalist in Sierra Leone. To be a journalist, and I hope the public understands this, to be a journalist in a society that doesn't that can crush the press, kill members of the press at any moment, imprison them. I mean, all we need to do is look how many. You could look to Gaza and you could see how many of the journalists were killed in Gaza. Palestinian journalists, Arabic journalists, they were a premier target there. But so we come to this story. So Joseph, if I'm right, is we're connecting to that mythological, and we're talking about who creates this, who ordered it, and stuff, because the people need to know where this myth came from. This is like royalty, this connection. So Virgil is the author of the myth of the creation story.
Yes, that's correct. So Aeneas, you will actually find Aeneas in the Iliad, which is the Homeric mythology of the Greeks. And Aeneas is actually the son of Aphrodite in that story. And
A goddess.
in Roman mythology, it's Venus. And so Aeneas is part of the royal family of Troy. And when the Greeks come to the shores of Troy and start the Trojan War, which in that mythology lasts 10 years, Aeneas is one of the heroes who's fighting the Greeks, and his life is saved by the gods a couple of times. And the interesting thing about it is that the Romans really enjoyed Greek culture, but they also wanted their own mythology. And since they conquered the Greeks, they wanted to, I'm sure, feel superior to some degree. So Julius Caesar was a very popular Roman general who won a lot of territory for Rome. And he made his great nephew, Augustus, he made him his son so he could continue his bloodline. And Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. So Augustus was a person who didn't want to lean on the republic anymore and believed that he would be the best ruler of Rome. So he converted Rome from a republic to an empire. And he gave himself the title of emperor. And he commissioned Virgil to write the Aeneid. And so the story that Virgil writes is that this Aeneas, who's a very pious man, who's a hero of Troy, uh, at the burning of Troy, during the time that the Greeks came in with the Trojan horse and started to burn and pillage Troy, he escapes Troy with his elderly father on his back and his son by his side. And you will see that image in a lot of sculpture you might find in Rome, because that is really the image that is the image that projects this piety, this commitment to family, this commitment to your people. And so he escapes and he has this harrowing journey. He travels all around the Mediterranean. He goes to Sicily, he goes to Carthage, he goes to Libya, and there's a city named Carthage at the time. And that city, he meets Dido. You might have heard of Dido and Aeneas. And eventually he finds himself, his father dies, he finds himself in Italy. And there's a place in Italy called Cumae, which is one of the early Greek colonies there. And there's a cave there. It's called the Cave of the Sibyl. There was a temple to Apollo, and there was a priestess there that predicted the future. So Aeneas meets the Sibyl. She takes him to the underworld, and there he meets his father, and he's told that he is actually going to be the beginning of the line of these great warriors and amazing people that will become Rome. And Augustus needed this story because in their history and mythology, the line of Julius Caesar, the Julii, and Augustus were related to Aeneas. So the story is we're related to the gods, and we are the new emperors, and you need to, support our quest. So it's
not only to the
sort of a
gods.
propaganda poem, actually.
Yeah. A propaganda poem. Well, but not only related to the gods, but when you read about Aeneas and you read the Homer, you start to find out that he's a great warrior. People would often describe him. The only one maybe above him was Hector, the great warrior
Correct.
in the Trojan War. So I mean, we're talking about a hero, a Muhammad Ali of stuff. So to be connected to a great warrior, warriors, highly valued in Rome, and then somebody, the son of a goddess, a Venus, over here, and who makes an incredible journey. But I can see all of that, and I can say in Virgil, people should know this is royalty as well. So Augustus is not just asking anybody to write the story. He's asking Rome's premier historian and writer to write this story, this mythology piece. And I worked on the Tohono Reservation and the Navajo Reservation in America, and they don't like the term myths. They turn around and say that every time we tell you our stories about our gods and how we came into the world, you call it a myth. We don't call it a myth. We are the first people in the world. And they would always tell me that. So mythology is something that in native cultures, they consider very real. So over there. So tell us now, we get this idea there's a great connection to literature. But what about Joseph? And what's it like for him?
Well, so Joseph grows up in Sierra Leone as a child. He has two siblings. He has two brothers, and he's the oldest son. And he has a wonderful father, not unlike Aeneas's father, who supports him and who provides wisdom for the future. But the eldest son in Africa usually is considered the person who needs to support the whole family. And that is what Joseph does. And he is also considered in his culture a very pious man. So he's a person who supports family, believes in the family history, the history of his people, and all of that. So Joseph goes through the civil war in Sierra Leone that some of you might have heard about, basically a war over diamonds where other countries' leaders came into Sierra Leone to take part of the territory, especially the diamond mines. And that war actually lasted 11 years. And the Trojan War supposedly lasted 10 years, according to Homer. So he goes through that ordeal, and then he's a journalist. He's also a radio commentator, and he supports the LGBT movement. And in the film, he talks about how that is something you don't do in countries like Sierra Leone. So he had to leave the country and leave his family. And he traveled to Burkina Faso. He traveled to Mali. He lived in Mali for some time. And then he eventually in Mali, he couldn't make a living. And he traveled across the Sahara Desert on one of those pickup trucks that you might see migrants and refugees traveling on. A harrowing journey in the desert for close to 10 days, I believe. And then he winds up in Libya. And in Libya, he really talks about how slavery still exists and how some of these there are sort of structures that provide transport for immigrants from Central Africa and beyond, and Western Africa primarily, to Libya, but quite often they're imprisoned, they're jailed, ransom is demanded from them, they're made to work, they are often abused sexually and otherwise. So he lived in Libya for 5 years and he had a very difficult environment. And then the civil war broke out in Libya. So he made the choice to travel across the Mediterranean to Italy. And he was very lucky to have survived that journey.
Yeah, these it's an amazing, journey, and people. I know our audience understands that refugees are they're not running to some kind of European vacation or some kind of vacation thing. This is about preserving and living your life and to be able to breathe like this is Pride Month. So imagine, so I'll be in West Hartford tomorrow for West Hartford celebrates West Hartford. I'm sure there'll be a tent, a pride tent there. Such a tent like that wouldn't be allowed in Sierra Leone and many, but definitely not in Libya and stuff. So we forget, we take for granted some freedoms and some abilities to express ourselves uh, and to just make a living, all this stuff. But it's an incredible thing. But I love this idea that you're connecting it to the mythology of one of the great heroes of Rome who happened to be a refugee. So Joseph is a refugee, and so was Aeneas over there, giving birth to the city. And the journeys are incredible. What kinds of obstacles did he face when he made it to Rome? I guess the Romans, the Italians, just jumped up and said, "Hallelujah! Our refugee, a son of our refugee hero, has arrived. Let us open the gates." And they gave him laurel leaves, maybe.
Well, not quite. I think Italy certainly has a very difficult burden. And Joseph in the film speaks about various reasons why refugees leave Africa. A lot of those reasons are poverty. Some other reasons are, to support your family back in Africa. Some people are coerced into traveling and enslaved and then later made to work on, corners of wheat fields in Italy as prostitutes and things of that nature. So there are many different reasons why people come. Some of those reasons might be, the difficulties they actually experience back home. And so Joseph elaborates on that quite a bit in the film. So when Joseph traveled across the Mediterranean, he was very ill. So when he got to Lampedusa, which is an island off the coast of Italy, belongs to Italy, he was hospitalized, and but he was supported by fellow travelers and refugees on the boat. And then he was taken to a facility for refugees and immigrants, and where he stayed for quite a while. And at some point, he was able to prove that he needed refugee status, and he was granted that status in Italy. So he got a work permit, and so when he came to Rome, he lived on the streets like a lot of refugees live. There's a Dublin Accord, which at the time when Joseph came to Rome, all of the people who migrate to Italy were supposed to stay in Italy. So they couldn't move further to, let's say, England or Germany. So even if they did try to illegally cross borders into the greater Europe, they would be sent back to Italy. And the Italian government at that time really didn't have much support for the immigrants that wound up in Rome. So you will see people living in parks and sleeping on benches, and there are many stories like that. So Joseph, stayed near the Termini train station, and he eventually found the Joelna Fuma refugee house, which is right near the Termini train station. And to him, it was sort of an oasis. There he was able to get support. He was able to study Italian, and he is kind of a leader, like Aeneas is. And so he found his way, and he's currently living in Rome, I think, I believe he came to Rome in 2011. So for quite some time, he's been in Rome now. He's gotten married in Rome. He has a family. He has two children in Rome, and he had a partner in Mali, and he had children with that partner as well. And he's invited them to Rome. So those children that are older are living in Rome. He still supports his family in Sierra Leone. His younger brother died and left three children that Joseph supports currently. So, and he gives speeches at the UN for refugee rights. Occasionally, he's a translator for refugees from Sierra Leone, and he travels to Greece and other places to do that. But he's also he is staff in a hotel, and he's, I believe, kitchen staff. So that is his current life. But outside of that, he's a supporter of refugee rights and women's rights, and he really lobbies for, and he has a lot of friends among the refugee and immigrant community in Rome. He really lobbies for them.
So, Henry David Thoreau used the term quiet men live lives of desperation, describing, the public, how there's so much wrong going around us, and what do? We don't pay attention. So Thoreau was opposed to the Mexican-American War. He was opposed to slavery. So in those days, you just have to pay taxes, and he leaves Walden. He leaves his town to go to Walden because he refuses to pay the taxes, and he gets incarcerated for that. But this kind of concept, Joseph is definitely a man who is not leading a life of quiet desperation. And this film can help maybe open the eyes of many people who are living these lives of quiet desperation. And it wouldn't take much money at all in the world if we were to help solve problems in people's home countries. If we were to do that, it's interesting as this film breaks today. We have the Homer and the Iliad film was going to be out very shortly, and I'm being told that there's like a 3-week waiting list to just watch the film. So here we are. It's close highly to it, and nothing. The things that haven't changed, in my view, is if you're African on almost any continent, but Africa, maybe even parts of Africa, but you are going to deal with incredible racism and bigotry, and you're going to be looked down. And Joseph is in Italy, and I've traveled through Europe, and so you don't have to be a refugee from Africa to be treated poorly. There are refugees from the Ukraine, refugees from Russia, from across Eastern Europe that come in, and Europeans are not kind. Neither are Americans. I mean, we just have to look at our president's immigration policies. What he wants to, stop refugees from being able to claim refugee status, because the idea is, in humane countries, we will help people who have migrated to our nation, and their lives are in danger and stuff. When we hear a lot about South American uh, refugees, easily we their lives are in danger. The gangs, the violence, that I mean, the murder rate in South American countries would make our worst nightmare. Murder rate in America look like a blessing and stuff. So this idea, how humane is your country, and stuff. So Joseph was lucky if they gave by getting the refugee status. I mean, and I'm not lucky. I mean, he had to work hard, had to achieve this, and it is getting rarer and rarer today. So I think your film is coming just at the right time, because the EU is a place that pays countries to hold Africans in refugees across the Mediterranean, and hold them there, so they don't come to Germany, they don't come to France, they don't come to Belgium, they don't do that stuff. I'm sure if America got the idea, they would do the same. They would pay people to keep people away. But does Joseph love Rome? That's what I'm wondering.
That's a good question. I think Joseph has a very well-developed community in Rome. Certainly, the Joel Nafumo Refugee House. He has contacts with people at the UN, where he gives speeches occasionally. He's part of a church where he's a preacher of an evangelical church.
Okay.
And if you listen to him speak, you can tell that even though he speaks in it's a Creole, it's a sort of derivative of English that is used primarily in Sierra Leone. He's a very powerful orator. And so, as you said, he's outspoken. So I really can't answer the question for Joseph whether he loves Rome or not. But I know that he has a new life in Rome. He has a family. He's reunited his children in Rome, and he's really a leader, I would say.
So let's reverse it. Does Rome love Joseph?
Well, that's a really good question. Certainly there are many geopolitical issues that are behind migrations,
Right.
and you can look at them from the perspective of the people who are migrating from a place, and you can look at it from the perspective of people uh, to in the place which people are migrating to. And quite often you will find that the people, for instance, when Aeneas came to Italy before there was actually a Rome, in the myth of the Aeneid, he had to fight Turnus, a local king that didn't like the fact that Aeneas and the Trojans were coming to Italy. So this is not a new development. In the foundation myth of Rome, these issues are being hashed out as they are being hashed out by governments today.
Yeah. So all right. So it's current. It's a narrative that has stood the test of time in
Absolutely. If
many
you
ways.
listen to if you read Roman historians, they talk about the many different nations that you would find in Rome. Now, some of them were brought there as war booty, as slaves. to work for the Romans. Some of them migrated there because it was the most prominent and wealthiest city in the ancient world. So there were many reasons for people 2,000 years ago to come to Rome, just like there are many reasons for people to come to Europe today.
And today, we don't have to go to war to get those slaves anymore. We are getting people migrating to countries and facing abuse in that terminology way. And I'm not saying it's intentional abuse, but it's certainly not welcoming and that stuff. And taking the same kinds of jobs that prior slaves would have had in the Roman Empire. Similar stuff. Nobody's coming in and getting and working at one of the top jobs. They're not working for the government. They're not work. If they're working at a restaurant, they're not the waiter. They're lucky to be the dishwasher.
Yeah, Joseph talks about civilized slavery. He uses that term several times in the film. So, there are many people that take advantage of migrants. Some of those people are the people who are transporting them. There are kind of institutions set up to support these migrations. So some of the people are the people that transport them across the Sahara in trucks. Some of these people are the people who jail them and then demand a ransom. There are people being jailed in Libya, for ransom. And then there are in the Americas, you would call them the coyotes that transport them across the Mediterranean. Many people die in the Mediterranean. And then once they're in Europe, there are people from their own cultures or outside of their own cultures that can take advantage of them in different ways. So it's a very difficult journey, and some, refugees and immigrants find that some repatriate back to their countries. From some of that repatriation is forced, some of it is done on their own, but there are many major geopolitical issues around migration, certainly.
And if that reparation is done forced, you're often putting people in very dangerous situations because they did not leave because their lives were wonderful. They left because violence and danger was surrounding them, and they might not live through it. So we send them back, and we do that. We do that in America. In America lately, we've been taking South American immigrants and sending them to Liberia and in Africa, places they never lived and stuff, But it's definitely something that it's so inhumane in my eyes that it's criminal, and that's why I use that Henry David Thoreau, the quiet men live quiet lives of desperation, because this is something we can help people. Migrants don't make your country poorer. They 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 enrich the economy. That's what they do. And part of me when I look at this, it's if they were blonde haired, blue eyed, like Donald Trump. He loves blonde haired, blue eyed South Africans. They can immigrate to America at will. They just call up and they get instant refugee status over there. So there's an element of racism and bigotry involved in this stuff. That's why it does remind me of that, and I'm interested that Joseph used the term civilized slavery. But when slavery was legal in America, we didn't enslave white people. We enslaved black people. And so there's this racism. And why did we take people from Africa? Why didn't we take people from Europe? I mean, there were wars in Europe that European nations conquered other nations. Why could they not do like Rome did and grab people and ship them out and say they're slaves and stuff? So race has a play in this. Did Joseph encounter, did the color, Ice Cube says, my skin is my sin. So was his skin his sin in Rome? And is for black refugees and refugees of color, Is there skin, there's sin in these places?
Well, Joseph does talk about that as a refugee. In a way, I made this film thinking that this journey, this guide to Rome, is really a way for Joseph to initiate new refugees, to tell them about Rome, to have them understand the difficulties that they will face there. So he talks about that you will face abuse, you will face racial discrimination, you might face uh, abuse in the workplace. So he talks about all of that. And as he's doing that, he's really trying to support his fellow migrants and try to sort of give them heart and allow them to, he talks about having a purpose and understanding why you're here. He talks about your family back in Africa, and he talks about supporting, your mother and other people in your family. And he also talks about looking at the inside of somebody. So looking at the inside of somebody, this person might be hungry right now, their clothes might be tattered, they might be not feeling well because of the journey they have undertaken. But if you look at the inside of this person, their potential, they are not unlike you. You know, how important are we to ourselves in our own quest for whatever it might be, for freedom, for economic security, for safety for our family? So that quest is as important to these migrants as it is to each one of us. This particular situation, the fact that people migrate and get away from financial difficulties or war or poverty or all those things, they're not new, and they're inherent in all of our experiences. The people that came here many years ago, like the Quakers and um, the Shakers and the Goodness Sakers, all these
Yep.
people that were seeking religious freedom in this country came here because they were being oppressed somehow in Europe. So
Mm.
these stories are really ageless.
Yes, and of course, nations would easily want to persecute faiths and religions who don't believe in war, and stuff. So yes, the Quakers, the Shakers, they were definitely targets not only here but back in Europe. And what's interesting when you look at Quakers in particular, though, the Quaker colleges are some of the most like uh, highly valued liberal institutions in America now. They gave birth to the historic black colleges. They have a mission, and so I was listening to you talk about this, the movie, and talking about Joseph. This is a refugee's guide. This is not really meant for Jesse Turner in Connecticut. This movie, while I may watch it, may make me sympathetic and stuff, but it's really for the refugees who are taking that journey to give them hope and then to give them practical knowledge. That's what Joseph is doing. He is the North Star in many ways for them. But I'd like to think about this stuff. I'd like to take us back now because your art, I've had you on the show in the past, and it was because I was trying to figure out. I saw all this art online, things like I might see a raft with like a lamp and a comfortable chair and a little bookcase, and the lamp would be lit and it'd be on a lake, and I'd be saying, "What's that?" And then I'm saying, "Wait a minute, this professor's calling this art and stuff," and you had so many interesting things, and you've been in Rome before. I remember one of the ones that you did, one of the films, you built a platform that you could move around the plaza and give people the opportunity to step up onto this platform and tell their story over there. And when I worked in on the Navajo reservation, they believe that story is everything. It is the center of the universe. It holds you strong, and you can never let your stories go. So just the idea of, and I remember the thing you built, it was, I can't describe it to people, it would be like those things that used to carry royalty around in Pharaoh's days, but
I
only
think you're
this one.
describing what you're describing is the Mobile Monument Project.
Yes, the mobile monument project over there, and all of that. And I'd like to see Joseph on that up there telling his story, but he does that anyway. But this idea, I want to talk about this art as well because when I was trying to figure it out last time when we were on the show, I couldn't really get to this piece. I didn't understand it. But lately we've had some discussion, and I've looked back at your page and your pedagogy. So pedagogy is that thing that our teaching philosophies that give us purpose and direction and stuff. But this, is it social practice art? Is that what it is? And this is a movement you talked about in the beginning with a German artist who creates this platform. But could you tell us more about this? Because I think we easily will create 1,000 new artists today. If they listen to the show and they think, wait a minute, I can make films, I could do this, I don't have to, I don't have to be great with the brush like Picasso or Monet. I don't have to be Michelangelo and sculpture. Michael. No, I don't need to do that. I could do this other stuff, and I can make a difference in the world. So could you tell us, because how do you explain that to your students when they're in your class and they come in your class? And I'm thinking in the art class, I remember there was art history, and art history was always interesting, and we learn about artists and their historical connections, but and then there's art itself. So it was always where I was intimidated because I say, well, I don't have the brush strokes of Michelangelo. I look like a 5-year-old kid, painting over there. But what do when you meet your students? Do you tell them that you are an artist that practices a social practice art? Is that what you do? Or
Yeah, I teach a class called Art and Community, and when I meet my students, I show them my work. Not everything I do is social practice art, but it's art in general is meant to either be viewed or discussed or worshipped in some places, like
yeah.
religious artifacts. So I think it's social at its core. And this idea of Joseph Beuys was this concept that every human being is an artist. By that, I believe he meant that we're all creative. Very often, we're most creative when we're under duress. If you look at the art of prisoners, for instance, people that have very little, might not have any supplies, they can make amazing artifacts with gum wrappers, because
Sure.
their place and their site and their materials are so limited, but that almost unleashes their creativity. So I think Joseph Beuys' concept is that we're all creative in one way or another. You don't have to be, Leonardo da Vinci with a pencil, and make amazing imagery. But you can live a creative life by how you navigate your life, your relationships, the things you get involved with. Um, Creative acts are not just the purview of artists or filmmakers or creatives, as people call them nowadays. Every one of us is creative in their own way. Some people are creative in how they save money. Some people are creative in conversation. They're funny, So this kind of does, Jesse, unleash the the sphere of creativity into everyone's world, I would say.
So and it has to be inspiring and in to students because there's this idea. Yes, we're all artists. We're living artists, and when I look at it, uh, our art can be positive or it can be negative, and but the idea that we control it, we create it, that's amazing. And anybody who reads poetry knows that the best poetry is written when people are under duress. When you lost your lover, when someone close to you has died, and of course, joyful moments. Maybe your child is born and stuff like that. And I write a lot of poetry. I'd never put it out there because I sit back and I say I don't want to. You take a risk when you expose your art. And so if I share my poetry, I'm like, maybe Joseph is going to think that's stupid or silly or no or whatever. But this idea that this social practice art is an art that helps people see their creative sides over there and redefine art. Yeah, I've liked that idea. So I don't have to be, Michelangelo with that pencil,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I still can be an artist.
Yeah, some people express their creativity in how they dress. Some people express their creativity in how they walk. So it's inherent to our species, I would say. But I think a lot of people are afraid they think that creativity is a sphere relegated to the creatives, the creative
Okay.
class. But I don't think that's entirely true. And I think that when you talk about things being created through duress, I come from Russia, and some of the, writers like Dostoevsky and
Oh,
Tolstoy, are people who are sort of telling the stories of the Russian people and the duress that they've endured. The serfs were emancipated in Russia at almost about the same time that the slaves were emancipated in the United States. So there were a very large part of the Russian population were serfs and lived under constant duress, could be bought and sold as part of the um, aristocrats trading villages or trading value, let's say. So those writers came out of a place of compassion for the Russian people. And, those particular situations happen worldwide, where the elites take advantage of the ones who are lesser than.
so art has this ability to give us to recreate our narratives. So that's one. So if we think about it, we're coming down to our last 3 minutes of the show, and I can't believe it's gone so quickly. I could go on for another hour, no problem, listening to this, learning that. But what are your hopes in releasing this premiere? In terms of maybe making the world more aware, changing it, sharing Joseph's life. What are your hopes for the film? Besides winning awards, which I hope happen.
The film has won some awards. It's been in film festivals, and I'm very grateful for the exposure that it's gotten. Well, I think my hope really is that regardless of which political persuasion we're of, whether we're on the right, on the left, or in the center, we all have these stories that are part of our lived experience. And all of us could probably point to the origin, his story of our family. My great great grandfather came from Ireland. My, great 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 grandfather came from Germany. My family was brought here as slaves. So it's in our DNA, this movement. So as Joseph said, I would hope that you would see the inside of somebody and in how you relate to yourself and your particular struggle or your particular difficulty in the moment. Everyone around you is experiencing something similar. So look at the inside and maybe look at the motivation. Our family came here for these reasons. These people are migrating here for their own particular reasons that might not be dissimilar from what my own family has experienced.
So that idea that, and if once we see the inside of all of us, we start seeing the humanity. There are far more similarities than differences in us in the world. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is Jesse Turner in the Truth to Readman Power Hour, and we had Ted Asimov, and he's talking about his movie premiering today, A Refugee's Guide to Rome. It's exciting. I hope you watch it. It's available on Amazon because my wife and I have already rented it, and we're going to watch it tonight. So we've been talking about you all week, Ted, just so you know, and your movie. And my wife is an immigrant and stuff, so we're enjoying that. So I just want
I'll
to,
just say one thing. You
yeah.
might want to turn on captions on Amazon because Joseph's English might be a little hard for some of us to understand.
Thank you, thank you. We will turn on cap. And since I'm old, you know, I'm going to be 71 in a couple of days, so I turn on the captions all the time now. It doesn't matter who's on, if in that sense. But I want to thank you for being our guest today. I wish you lots of luck. I hope that this movie gets 1 million viewers, and just want to say to New Haven, hey people, click that link on there and take a look at this movie. You're going to love it. It's transformational. And thank you, Ted, for being our guest today.
Thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.